Hi guys, so we're back with a special audio only episode after our 2 week
Yes.
hiatus, and we're just so happy to be back recording. We had to do a little pivot. If you're familiar with Friends, I quote them often. And yeah, so then we decided to make this episode about the power of the pivot. Welcome to the Aligned and Divine podcast. I'm your host, Mercedes Smith.
And I'm your host, Olivia Thomas. We created this podcast to have a safe space for you to share, connect, relate, and ultimately to grow.
The goal of this podcast is to share with you the strategy and mindset necessary to align with your highest self so you can massively uplevel your business, your relationships, your self-concept, and step into your innate divinity to raise the consciousness of the entire planet.
We want you to know that you are always aligned and divine.
We literally just spent the past 2 hours recording or editing 2 episodes that we had recorded earlier this week to get us back, and then we were like, let's
It's not, yeah, it's
scratch
not
that.
it.
It's not it.
Let's pivot.
Let's pivot.
Let's pivot. Yeah, I'm really excited about this because I think pivoting and not being attached to your old stories and beliefs and programming is something I'm literally have been thinking about and implementing in my life so much lately.
Mhm.
So, yeah, I'm excited to talk through this, and I even I wrote down some things while we're brainstorming and taking notes about what we're going to talk about. I literally wrote down some things that I'm actively working on. So excited to
Mhm.
chat through those, and being authentic is one of those things. So,
Yes, 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 yes. Oh my goodness. I wanna touch on something that you just said, which is, you have to be willing to, shed all of these beliefs because in order to pivot, so for example, you guys, we have had this crazy past couple of weeks, and so we made the executive decision not to have any episodes because we just didn't wanna rush, and honestly, we just didn't have time to film and edit and do all of those things. And so when we knew that this week we were coming back, we filmed some episodes earlier this week, weren't feeling too good about them, and then at least I wasn't, at least. And then when we went to go edit today, that feeling was confirmed. But if we were holding on to that belief that we had to stick to our guns, stick to what we first recorded and did that, then we would have ended up with a version of an episode that we just did not feel right about, that just didn't feel good, and it probably maybe it could have helped somebody else, but it just didn't feel right to us, and, this is our podcast. So, every episode
Mhm.
has to feel right to us, right? But we had to let go of, at least for me, I had to let go of that belief that it had to be perfect the first time and that we had to stick to our guns with that, and, no, we don't actually. And I think that a lot
Yeah.
of the pivot is you first have to allow yourself to release yourself from these other beliefs that you used to have, of things having to go a certain way or your life having to be like this, or these truths that you've adopted as truth that aren't really truths, they're just things that you've adopted.
Mhm.
Um, and I think that's a huge thing before you can even actually make the pivot. And by the way, the pivot doesn't have to be something that's this grandiose thing, right? We think that it's always has to be this huge leap, and it really is something that could be very, very minor, feels very minor in the moment. And a lot of times you don't even know these pivotal decisions are pivotal because they can seem so small, but when you walk them out, they end up changing the entire course of your life, by the way.
Mhm. Yeah.
So, I just wanted to say that because I think that that's the most a really important part of pivotal decisions is you have to be willing to let go of your previous beliefs. You have to be willing to let go of, the outcome, the end goal. You have to be able to let that go in order to actually make the pivot and possibly most of the time, 95% of the time, end up with an end solution that is way better, or an end outcome that is way better than you would've imagined or done for yourself.
Letting go. Oh, that's a big one. Just letting go of your old like it's almost like you are in a routine and you have these habits and you have these beliefs and it's like, oh, I am like this because I've always been like this. I've always believed this. I've always done this. And
Mm.
letting go of that and realizing you literally can reinvent yourself. You can pivot. You
Yes.
can take on new beliefs, new habits, at any point, right? For me, at least, and maybe this is just a me thing, but for me, I know that I struggle with other people's perceptions of me and, or you not necessarily struggle with other people's perceptions of me, but struggle with changing because people have a certain perception of me. People have a perception
Mm.
of being like this. And so it's like, oh, I can't change because people know me in a certain way. And
That yeah.
that's what I kind of have struggled with and I'm trying to get over because it's like if you yeah, you can change at any point and people will eventually conform to that new belief and that new version of you. You just have to stick with it and you have to be comfortable becoming that new version of yourself and pivoting.
Oh my god. Liv, I know that you've been, like you've had, like, the you said earlier that you've experienced this the most in the last 2 years. Can you give us some examples of, like, how your identity has shifted or the reinventing of yourself? Like, tell us how that's happened and, like, what's the outcome?
Yes. I mean the biggest thing is me talking about spirituality and manifesting and mindset. I think when I first started learning about this and I first started working on my self concept and getting into manifesting and everything, I was like, oh, people are going to think that this is really weird, or people don't know me talking about
Mm,
positivity and all of this stuff. Like people don't know me as that. So it's going to be weird if I start talking about this stuff.
mm,
But I mean, first of all, again, I think this is in my own head a lot of times, people's perceptions of me, but I've realized like as I've stuck with this and as I've gotten more and more into it and just and speak my truth, especially like started speaking my truth like with my friends and family and on social media, like started posting about it and making TikToks and stuff about it. I've realized it's just, yeah, it's become more of my identity and people literally are responding very well to it. And people that I talk about it to, yeah, a lot of people just know me as this kind of spiritual manifestation person now. And I love it. So I can literally see people reflecting back to me these new beliefs and this new version of myself. And it's more it is now like this is my authentic self and this is my authentic truth. And I can see that it's being really well received and that's why I think does that kind of answer your
yeah.
question?
Y I think too, just like an observation, like, as you made that pivot into this newer version of yourself, right? And that you've kind of unlocked these different versions of you and you're living it out and you've made that pivot into that. Not only do people around you who know your previous versions of yourself, not only do they learn how to adapt to this new version of yourself, right? But also you begin to attract people who are on the same plane as you, right? Because like when I met you, I only know you as this version because I'm
Yes.
at that same level, and I think that that also, like, we can have a whole other episode about, like, living in your authentic self, and a huge underlying theme of that, and that the huge, kind of best part for me about being authentically me, is that I attract other people who are also authentically themselves, and so they like me or they love me and they're in my life because of who I am truly and authentically and genuinely, not because I'm this version of myself that I portray myself to be. And I think especially when the way that I grew up of being like this chronic people pleaser and also feeling like I had to prove my value and prove my worth, I knew how to be a chameleon in many different areas of my life, and in any room I can make friends in any room that I walk into because I know how to adapt to any environment that I'm in, but that doesn't necessarily mean that I'm showing up as my true authentic self. It just means that I know how to mirror people, right? And that was something that I had to let go of because if I'm living authentically, then I needed to show up as who I am and be okay that some people are not gonna like me and some people are gonna love me, and know that the people who aren't gonna like me, they're not meant for me, and the people who love me, they love me, and they love me for exactly who I am. That's a whole other thing, but I think when you're pivoting, especially as it comes to your identity, because our identity is something that we wanna hold on to so fucking bad. Like,
Mhm.
that is the thing that we hold on to so bad, so hard, like, it's rooted into who we are, and it's the thing that we always are the most reluctant in letting go of. And we identify our identity like, we identify with things in so many different ways because you have to remember that your identity is, like, a whole list of behaviors and ideas and beliefs that make up who you are, right? And so if I identify as this certain type of person, then I also have to be living in alignment with that type of person. And if I identify, like, for example, as a Taurus, I always like to use the zodiacs as an example because people like that's something that we identify with, right? If I identify as a Taurus, then I have to, like, also have all of these beliefs about myself and these behaviors about myself that are in alignment with that identity, right? And so that means that I'm going to identify as being an indulgent and being, kind of not lazy, but like definitely on the I'm trying to sleep side. I take naps and I eat a lot and those things, but I'm also super loving, super loyal, all of these things. But if I use that as my only identity, and I make that as my own main identity, it's gonna be hard for me to pivot outside of those things. So if I wanna be somebody like, for example, one of the hardest things that I'm trying to get through is, like, I wanna be somebody who, I'm on time for things and I don't need naps all of the time because that's something that I like really identify with, right? Where I'm like, I'm just the person who takes naps in the middle of the day all the time and I'm always late, right? That's part of my identity. But if I want to pivot outside of that, like I don't want that to be a part of who I am anymore. And I want to make this pivot into being a woman who is very like people can depend on me for their time. Like I show up on time. If not, I'm early. And also, like, I don't need to take naps, like, I do take rests all the time, but, like, I don't need to take naps every single day, right? If I wanna show up and make that my new identity, I have to pivot, but in order for me to pivot into a different behavior, a different set of systems, a different set of habits, I have to release the old identity first. I have to release those old beliefs, release those old ideas of, like, that's
Have to
something
do
that
that.
you have to do that, because otherwise I'm just holding on so hard to that I could never make the change, and that's why I think,
Mhm.
I don't remember who said this, so please don't somebody work quote me on this, but I do remember reading, a quote that said something along the lines of, like, "If you want to, change your life, you have to become another person before you become another person." And it's like you have to be it's not about changing what you do, it's about changing who you are. I have to be
Mhm.
something before I can, like, do the things that allow me to be that person. Does that make sense? Am I making sense currently?
Yes. Yes. No, it does. And I've heard that a lot, kind of that idea of you have to become the person that you wanna be,
Yeah.
and then everything starts to, like, yeah, conform to that new version of yourself, but you have to be it first. Like, you can't
Mhm.
wait on anything. You can't wait for people to see you like that. You can't wait. You have to become that version of you first and really embody the, ideal next version of yourself.
Yeah, for sure. And I think too, like, especially when we're thinking about pivoting and reinventing yourself, it all comes down to, like, letting go of the idea that your life moving forward has to be the same as it was in the past. And that's
Yes.
something that is like, for me, it sounds simple, but to be honest, it's something that's been hard for me where, our brains, again, we want to be comfortable. We want to be comfortable. And that comfortability is knowing, is sticking to what we know. right? And we know our past because we've been through it already. And so those are the evils and the good that we know. So we'd rather stick to those. And so you have to let go of this idea that the future has to look the same as your past. And that's
Mhm.
something that, like, in my meditations, and in my prayers, I'm like, God, I don't want the same version of me that I was before. I don't want the same devils that I've been dealing with. I don't want to be stuck in these same cycles over and over and over again. And that's what the pivot is. It's you pivoting yourself, taking just a step outside of the cycles that you had been in, and that changing the entire course of your life, at
Yeah.
least for me.
And
And I feel that now more than ever.
yes, 1000%. And I guess for me, again, it's like this idea of what people know me as.
Mhm.
And yeah, making those steps of like, nope, this is the new version of myself. This is what I'm passionate about. This is what I want to talk about. This is this new version of me, expressing that in the world, expressing that to your friends, to your family, to people around you. And it's for me, again, I can only talk from my own experience, but it's like scary at first. It's like, oh, I want to talk about manifesting. I want to talk about crystals, like start talking about it. And then, but really making like taking the jump and taking the leap and actually expressing yourself. And then I mean, for me, it's like, oh, okay, then people start to accept you and go along with it and get interested even in the things you're talking about and start to see you as this new version of yourself. But you have to see yourself first. Like you have to see
Mhm.
that version of yourself first, be authentically that version of yourself, and then people start to see you after, like then people start to see you as that version.
I love that. I'm wondering too, like, if you had a step-by-step process, like, because my thought process is like, how do people even know when to pivot? Like, what's your process of knowing when it's time to pivot?
That's a good question. I think, I guess for me, so something else I'm working on is, and me and Mercedes were talking about this before we got on the pod. But for me, something I'm working on is being more authentically and being authentically myself and being vulnerable and being nice when it comes to dating. And this is something
Mhm.
I've struggled with in the past because I've had this, operating in my masculine energy, not letting myself be kind and compassionate to people that I'm dating because I was scared that if I'm really nice and I show you a lot of affection, what if it's not reciprocated? And I've had this belief for so long. And I think for me, I'm realizing I need to pivot. I need to reinvent myself and I need to be more authentically myself, which is a caring and compassionate and loving and kind person. Like that is my core, but I've haven't been operating in that for so long. And to your question, what is triggering me needing to change is kind of being fed up with that pattern and
Mm.
realizing that if I continue in that pattern, then I am not going to have a relationship that I want. Right. Like right
Yeah.
now, I am dating someone and he's a really, really great guy. But I've realized that I really realized that these patterns that I've had in the past of not being compassionate, not sharing how I actually feel, not being nice and loving, it's not going to work. It's not going to
Yeah.
work if I want to continue dating this man and be in a healthy, loving relationship. I am going to have to change. And so I think to answer your question, like what triggers like pivoting is realizing like taking a look at your patterns and being like, okay, where do I want to improve my life? Like what parts of my life need to be improved?
I think for me, when I know it's time to pivot, I feel it in my body before I feel it anywhere else.
Mm,
Like, I feel it in my body, in my gut. I get that gut instinct of like, whoa. And it's almost like an alarm where my body's like, whoa, something's wrong. Pause, take inventory, assess, you know? Like,
Yes.
for example, when I think
Yes.
about like today, Olivia and I are in the middle of editing our podcast episodes that we had recorded earlier this week. And I'm like, progressively, like, we couldn't have been more than what, 5 minutes into editing the podcast.
Yeah.
And this is like
Yeah.
a 45-minute long podcast episode that we were like looking at. And like every time I cut and pasted and edited and did something, like I could feel just, it was like a wrench in my stomach. And it was tightening
Mhm.
and tightening and tightening and tightening till finally I got this like little alarm that was like, something's wrong. And I was
Yeah.
like, hold on, pause, pause. And it was interesting too, the process that happened where I had to pause for myself first. Like I felt that alarm in my body, paused for myself first, thought about it. My first thought was like, Olivia is gonna fucking hate me. Even though that's not the case, but that was my first thought. I'm like,
Yeah.
Olivia's gonna fucking hate me. What is she gonna think that I'm gonna wanna like, and then I was like, do I really wanna like, what do I wanna do here? That was my next thing.
Mm.
Before I even addressed it to Liv, I was like, what do I want to do here? Am I not happy with this episode? Is there something wrong? Is there something off? If that's the case, then how do I want to approach it? And immediately I was like, the whole episode is trash. We gotta trash the whole fucking thing. And then I was like, okay, great. If we're trashing the whole freaking episode and then literally we're wanting to post another episode tomorrow, like, then I'm thinking in my head, I have to come up with a solution for that. And then finally I was like, actually, I don't. Like, I can talk to Olivia about this and we can come up with a
Literally.
solution together. And
Yep.
so it was a
And
process.
what's
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say what's funny is like I low key was kind of thinking the same thing. I was like, I'm
Mhm.
not in love with this episode. I felt like I wasn't 100% prepared. It was good. I think it would have helped people, but again, it's like we weren't 100% sold on it. So it's just funny that
Yeah.
you were worried about what I was gonna think. You're like, oh, she's gonna be pissed, whatever. But actually, we were 100% on the same page. And
Mhm.
you speaking your truth, being like, actually, this is I don't really love this episode. Let's not do this. I was like, bet, love. I'm on board.
Yeah, no, immediately. But it was just interesting the process that happened in my brain of like, first I felt it in my body, then I was thinking about it in my brain of like, okay. And it happened in a matter of seconds, mind you. This wasn't
Yeah.
something that like took forever. Like I'm sitting here contemplating. Within 5 minutes of editing this episode, I felt it in my body. I thought about it and I was like worried about what she was going to think about me. And then I was like, no, what? Let me just be authentic to myself because this is my podcast too. And like, even if she did like it and I didn't like it, I still think that I should say something because if she didn't
Mhm.
like an episode that I loved, I'd have been like, all right, let's redo it. You know what I mean? So it
Yeah.
was like,
Mhm.
it was just like, okay, we have to be on the same page. It has to be both of us in this together. Let me just talk to her about this. And then for her to have the same feeling, just reaffirm that like that was the right decision, right? And
Yes.
so
Yes.
that's one of the ways that you're going to know that it's time for you to pivot is you're going to feel it in your body or you're going to feel fed up. You're going to recognize that you're in a pattern and a lot of it is self-awareness. This is why we always talk about like when you're raising your self-consciousness and your self-concept, self-awareness is like the number one thing. You have to be so in tune with yourself. Because if I just constantly ignored my body, which we've all been there before, where we've ignored ourselves,
Mhm.
we've dishonored ourselves in that way. And you have to be, and I used to do that, which is why I'm in the process of continually rebuilding that trust with myself of like, no, I listen to my body now. I listen to my intuition. And the more that you do that, the more that relationship with yourself grows and the I don't want to say that the voice gets louder, but the lower all of the other voices get. So it's
Mhm.
easier for you to hear yourself among all of the programming, among all of the anxiety and fears and depression and all of those other voices that like to occupy space in your brain. You have to make sure that your voice is the loudest. And that
Mhm.
that inner voice, whatever that is to you, to me, that's Holy Spirit. That's my connection with God. And when I get that gut feeling, I fucking listen. Okay.
Yes.
Even as
Yes.
something as simple as a fucking podcast episode
Yeah,
to something
exactly.
as
Like
big as
truly.
moving across the country. It's
Listening.
uprooting your whole life.
And right, and what you're just saying, you have to make sure that that voice is the loudest. Another way to look at it for me is like, maybe it's not the loudest, but you have to listen to it.
Yeah.
Maybe it's not the loudest voice. Maybe you have a lot of other thoughts and people's opinions and da da da, but you have to find that your actual gut feeling and listen to it, even if it's not the loudest, but you
Yeah.
know that that is the right thing to do.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. So one thing I want to say too, Liv, you put on here being in your feminine energy. Can you talk about that? I want to know, girl. What you mean by that?
Yes, girl. Yes, girl. Well, that is I kinda it goes back to this kind of situation with relationships because I've realized well, okay, you asked how do you figure out where when it's time to pivot? I
Mhm.
think a good way to think about that, a good way to figure out where how it is a good time to pivot is looking at your problem areas. Looking
Mhm.
at the areas of your life where you have these repeated problems or issues or things aren't going the way you want or where you're frustrated or whatever. And that's been relationships for me.
Mhm.
Like I have had like the relationships part of my life has been kind of chaotic and just not exactly what I would want. And in an ideal world. And so that's where I've had to realize, like, okay, let me figure out what my beliefs are here. Let me figure out what my old programming has been here. And one of those things has been realizing that I have been in relationships and I guess in probably a lot of other aspects of my life too. I've been operating in my masculine energy of
Mhm.
like, I have to do this. I have to fix everything. I it's all in me, like, I need to be in control. I need to be in control. I think that my
Mm.
childhood was very, like, chaotic, and um, I always I felt like as an adult, I needed to, like, be in control, so then things don't get chaotic, and it has to be a certain way, or it has to be this, like, kind of rigid, and being that is very much in my masculine energy. So I've realized I need to be more in my feminine energy of of being in receiving and being able to express my feelings. Like that was a big thing. That's was really hard for me. Still trying to figure out the root of that, but like I could not express my feelings to save my life. And again, maybe it was because I was scared that it wasn't going to be reciprocated or whatever, but realizing that I deserve to be able to express my feelings and that's not stupid to do. I think that's an example of operating in your feminine energy and then just being more in flow and not feeling like you have to be in control of every single thing and realizing that I've had to realize that things can still work out even if I don't have full control over them. Like I can set my intentions and do the best I can do, but it doesn't always have to be perfect. I don't have to be in control of every single aspect. And when it comes to yeah, being in a relationship with a masculine energy, me realizing okay, it's okay for the masculine energy to take the lead and I can operate from my feminine, loving, caring feelings self and it's not stupid.
Oh my goodness, yes. Yes, yes. I love that. Yeah, man, I love this episode. I love this episode for a lot of reasons. Mostly because I'm like really proud of ourselves, like for pivoting, even just something as simple as like letting go of the last episodes, like releasing that, and then just like choosing to even pivot into just an audio only episode so that way we can be authentic to the things that we're saying. Like, and these are all little ways that you continually build your relationship with self and that you build that trust with yourself. And I think one of the things for me that is really, really important because we can get really woo woo and we can get really like kind of, we have this tendency to get kind of vague when we're talking about spirituality and like being in the spiritual what realm and raising your self conscious and all these things. It could be really easy to get kind of woo woo and get really vague to where we're not dealing with tangible things. But to me, it is really important that as you're becoming another person and you're becoming this other version of yourself and you're building your self concept, what it is it's not just like affirmations are great, don't get me wrong, but it's not just speaking the affirmations over yourself, but it's building a stack of undeniable evidence, undeniable proof that you are who you say you are. And the way that you do that is by honoring yourself in these tiny little moments. So even something as simple as pivoting and doing what we did today and creating this episode, those all of those little things add up throughout your day. And I will forever speak this from the mountains, from the top of the mountains, is that, having those little things, those little decisions that add up to the person that you want to be, that takes integrity, that takes respect, that takes, like, a lot of discipline and a lot of consistency, and it also takes you being super duper duper honest with yourself about where you're at and where you want to be. And when you're pivoting, a lot of times we can get to this period where I was just talking earlier with Olivia about this, about, like, we get into this place where we think that we failed because things didn't work out the way that we thought that they were, or we allow other people, like I was talking about that with my family, like we allow other people to kind of tell us that we failed when in actuality we've pivoted. And we
Mhm.
have to release this idea that failing is something that's bad, when in reality, like, failing is just showing you that it's another place that you need to pivot. And so I hope
Mhm.
that this message was encouraging to you, and also for you to know that it doesn't matter how old you are, how long you've been doing whatever it is that you're doing, you always have the power to pivot. You have the power at any given moment to reinvent yourself. You have the power
Mhm.
and you have the right. Okay. Nobody has the right to tell you how you're going to live your life. We only get one of these lives, at least for right now. We only get one of these lives right now, and you are in control of your life. So you can either be in the driver's seat and a co-creator with the universe, and you can pivot and you could follow direction and you could do all of those things and put your gas on the freaking, or your foot on the gas, or you can be a backseat driver and let because life is going to happen regardless. The
Mhm.
question is, are you going to take responsibility? Are you going to be the person that determines where your life is going to go? It doesn't matter how old you are, it doesn't matter. Vera Wang didn't make her first dress until she was 40, okay? So it doesn't matter how old you are. You have total control of when you choose to pivot and when you choose to live the life that you wanna live. You have control right now.
Mhm. Yep. It is okay to change. It is okay to change. It might be uncomfortable at first,
Mhm.
but it's worth it. Like, it's only uncomfortable because I talk about this all the time, but our brain loves to be comfortable. Like, our brain just like naturally likes to be comfortable and to stay in these routines and old beliefs. And even if it's not productive for you, our brain would rather stay there naturally because it's easy, it's comfortable, whatever. So changing, pivoting, reinventing yourself might feel uncomfortable at first, but then you stick with it and this new version of yourself ends up becoming comfortable. And then your brain
Yeah.
gets on board, everyone around you gets on board, your reality gets on board with this new version of yourself. So stick with it. It is okay to change. It's okay to change your beliefs and change your routines and change the trajectory of your life and pivot, baby. Oh my God, if there's one thing, pivot. Truly, just continue to up level and pivot, and your life literally just keeps getting better and better.
Well, that's all I have for this episode. What about you?
Same,
Same.
same.
Perfect. Okay, well, if you enjoy this episode, first of all, I wanna say thank you, and, shout out to us being back. But if you enjoyed this episode, please
Yes.
do us a favor, share it with a friend, and please leave us a review. The reviews are, like, literally, we love them. We read every single one of them, and they help us get our podcast out there more. If you don't know anything about a podcast, girl, okay, reviews matter, and we appreciate any feedback. And yeah, we will see you on the next one.
Yeah, next
You
one.
might
Much
not see
love.
us, but we'll see you.